Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 6. Today, we're going to move away from, or we're going to shift our talk, because the last couple of weeks we've been discussing about databases, and now we're going to make a shift and we're going to talk about PHP Data Objects. And what this will do is it will allow us to mix what we've learned about databases and what we know about PHP, and we'll be able to combine the two. So essentially, we're going to be able to learn how we can communicate with a database from PHP. Along with that, we will also talk about your midterm project for this course, which is Sociology. All right, are there any questions before we get started with the lecture? So I do want to make a note here before we get started. This will be our last lecture before midterm break, which is next week. With that, we will not be meeting next week. So we won't have a class next week. There's no Zoom meeting scheduled for next week. You just have the whole week off. With that said, if you do have any questions, you can email me during the week. I can't promise that I'll be responding uh, as frequently or as consistently or right away because I'm going to actually be moving during the week. So moving to a new house, so that will take up most of my time. But I will try and respond to emails during the week. All right, so if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and get started with our lecture, which is PHP Data Objects. All right, so PHP Data Objects, or PDO for short, is a PHP interface which allows us to access and manipulate databases. And it is an independent of its database. So what that means is that it doesn't matter which database we're talking about, we will still use PDO, and we'll use the same PDO uh, methods and commands as we would regardless of the database we're using. So with PDO, we can use MySQL, we can use SQLite or SQL Server or DB2, anything that has a driver for PDO can be used, and there's many of them. That's one of the advantages of PDO as opposed to the other popular database interface, which is MySQLi, which is specific for just MySQL databases. Now, the other thing we need to know, or you need to know about PDO, it is an object-oriented. It uses object-oriented programming, which means PDO is a class, and we will create instances of the PDO class. And so when we make these method calls, we'll be making them differently than we have in the past. So there's some slightly different syntax we'll need to learn when we're working with PDO, and I'll go through that slowly. All right, so that's just kind of a brief overview of PDO. Now let's talk about how we connect to a database with PDO. What do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do, or the first thing you need to know is that the connecting to a database, it will depend on which database management system you're using. Each one has a different requirement for connecting to the database. This is the only part of PDO that is going to be database specific. Once you've made this connection, all of the remaining code is interchangeable regardless of the database. This is the only part that's different. Now, with that said, all of the examples I'm providing in these slides and on the content or on the website, on the course website, is specific for MySQL, which is the database we're using for this course. So there are three parts that are required for connecting to a MySQL database with PDO. And those are the database source name, or DSN, the username for the database, as well as the password. So the username and password and the database source name. Now, when we make a connection to the database, we'll also want to place it inside of a try-catch block. And what this will do, and I'll explain this when we look at the code a little bit closer, this will allow us to basically make sure that the database connection was successful. And if it's not, it's going to prevent us from moving forward, essentially. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the code would look like when we're connecting to a database. So here we have inside of a PHP block, we have our DSN, right? So our database source name. And this is what the string would look like for MySQL. Now, again, this will look differently for other database management systems, but for MySQL, this is what it looks like. It will start with the MySQL prefix and a colon, and then we'll have the host value, so key and value, as well as the database name and value. Right. So remember that when you're connecting to a database, you will need to provide it with a host. Now, the host is where the location of the database. Is this going to be a remote database or is it going to be a local database? So for this course, we're going to be working only locally, so it'll always be localhost. Then we have our database name. So this is the database we're going to work with. It was asked last week, can we cross over databases? And the answer is no. You only work with a single database at a time. So we select which database we're using, in this case, movies, and then we'll move forward. Now, I've also created variables. Now, this is a variable, so I've created variables for my username and password as well, which is root. This is our default username and password for our local database. And then here is our try catch block. And again, the way the try catch block will work is that any lines inside of the try block, if it throws an error or an exception, then it will be caught by the catch block. So for example, if we messed up this database connection when creating our PDO instance, that will throw an exception, which is kind of like an error, but not quite an error. And when that exception is thrown, it will be caught by our catch block, which is going to output the message, and then it's going to use this die command. And the die command is essentially a way of halting our PHP. Now, there's another command. It's called exit, which you might see in some of the examples I provided. Exit and die are the same thing. They are actually exactly the same code. It's just two different methods or two different ways of calling the same method. So die or exit will do the exact same thing. And again, it will just halt the PHP script from there and quit. And that's typically what we want to do. If we can't make a database connection, most likely we can't let our program continue. So we'll want to quit before we continue. So this is typically how we would connect to our database. And you could just copy this and paste it in and just update your database name, update your username and password, and you're good to go with connecting to your database. And we would also typically store this in its own file, like a DB file, db.php file, so that we can import it in multiple other files that would need access to the database. All right, so once we've connected to the database with PDO, we'll now be able to write queries to the database to make either requests to retrieve data or update the data or delete the data. So the first thing we're going to look at is select with PDO. So this is all about retrieving data from the database and how we can do that. So there is a query method inside of the PDO class or the PDO instance, which will allow us to execute select statements. So the query method will actually return what is called a PDO statement object. So when we actually run a query and we pass it in an SQL query, it will run that with the database, but it doesn't return the results right away. It returns this object. We will actually need to use another set of methods, either fetch or fetch all, the most common ones. There's others, but fetch and fetch all are the most common, and that will actually get us our results. Now, the fetch method will get one result at a time. So for example, if we wanted to retrieve all of the movies from our movies table, we would get one movie at a time. And then we would use a while loop to then retrieve the next one, because fetch method is smart enough to know that we've already retrieved the first row. So now we're going to retrieve the next row and then the next and next and next until we run out of rows. The fetch all method will actually retrieve all of the rows as an array. And then we can use that array to inside of a for each loop to access each item the same way. So there really isn't, both fetch and fetch all will allow us to do the same thing. It's just two different ways of doing it. And I'll show you an example of them both. All right, so here's an example of us getting our movie. So at the top, we have our PHP block. And you notice that I have this required once db.php. So this is retrieving that connection to our database. Then we'll write our SQL query. So we have a variable called SQL, and then we have just an SQL query, just like we've been writing the last couple of weeks. So very simple one, select star from movies. So we're going to get all of the columns and all of the movies from the movies table. Then we will do the DB. So if you remember from back a few slides, we had stored our database connection to the variable DB. So that's important because this is our PDO instance. So we're going to make all of our method calls from this right here. So query is our method call. So we're going to do DB. And now here is that object oriented. Because we're dealing with an object here, we're going to have to use this arrow. So it's a single dash and a greater than. So this is a special type of arrow for accessing methods from an object. So DB, the arrow, and then query, and then we'll pass in our query statement. Now you could just pass your query statement directly in there, but I typically like to store it in a variable. Makes it a little easier to read. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. What's the db.php inside the first statement? What is it? Is it?
Yeah, so if let me go back a few slides here. Back. Okay, forward. All right, so right here, this is our db.php file. So db.php. Okay, and right here is our db. So this is, we have a new PDO. So this is creating a new PDO instance. All right, and we're storing it to this variable db. So that's very important because we're going to be using this variable db anytime we need to communicate with our database. So this makes a connection to the database, but it's also how we communicate with the database.
Okay, now why we wouldn't put this block of code into our PHP page?
Okay, so typically we want to keep this separate because if we have, say, multiple different PHP files in our website, so say we have an index.php and about.php, and maybe if this is a movie site, maybe we have a movie.php for a single movie. All of those would need to have access to this database. And if we keep this in a separate file, then we can just include this one file in all of those, and we're not having to duplicate this content each time, because each page, each PHP file would have to do this, would have to run this code.
Okay, so if we are work on just a single page, PHP page, we can put it.
In theory, if you had just a one page thing, then you could just include this and not have it as separate. I'm going to go through an example of this, and it'll probably clear up some of your questions with this. I know it's a little hard to see these in slides. All right, so moving forward, we already covered all this. All right, so we're back to our using our select statement. So right up here, again, we're retrieving that db.php. This is where our database connection, we're creating our new PDO instance occurs. And so we'll have access to the variable $db from this. Right, so we wrote our query, we've made our results, or we made our query method. So this has sent it to the database, and then we'll retrieve the results. Now, result here is a PDO statement. It's not the actual results. That's where the fetch and fetch all method comes in. So this is using the fetch method. So we're going to put a while statement here. So while movie equals result, at the little arrow, and then fetch. All right, and this is going to fetch all of the results and store it to movie. And then we could echo out the movie title inside of the while statement. So again, this will retrieve each movie one at a time and output each one because it's inside of this while loop. All right, so that is fetch. Now with fetch all, really the only difference is that instead of waiting to retrieve each one individually, each result one individually, we're going to retrieve them all at once, and we're going to store them to a variable called movies. And then from there, we can do a for each, movies as movie. And then from here, we can echo out each movie title.
I have a question about at which step we already fetch the data from the database to the local machine to the local browser. I mean.
Yeah, so don't think about it we're storing it to the local browser. We're retrieving it from the database and we're storing them into variables inside of PHP. And then from those variables, we can then output them to the browser.
Okay, so when we do the first step, and we're gonna store the data we pulled from the server and store it in the memory.
Yeah, you could think of it, we're storing it inside of the PHP server. Remember, it's not leaving the server. PHP runs all on the server. So we're accessing it from the database, which is on the server, and then we're storing it into PHP, which is on the server. So at this point, it's not in the browser at all yet. The only place is once PHP has compiled all of this, and then we just have the HTML, which we're sending.
Oh, yeah, got it. Thanks.
All right, so we're going to look at one more thing, and then we're going to take a look at this in an example that I have. All right, so that was how we can use for select statements, so retrieving data. But for non-select statements with PDO, we need to use a different method. So there is an exec method that we will use to execute non-select statements. So this exec method will return the number of rows affected. So remember when we were working with databases and we updated something and we updated a single row, it would come back with you've updated or one row affected, right? Or if we deleted a couple rows, it'd say 2 rows affected. Well, that's what the exec method will do. It will return a number with a number of rows affected. So we'll get 1, 2, 3, so forth on the number of rows. All right, so let's take a look here. Again, we're going to retrieve that PDO connection. Then we're going to write our SQL query. Here we're going to insert a value. So we're going to insert into movies a movie title with the value of Pulp Fiction. All right, so when we execute this method, so we do db exec, and we send in our query, result will equal the result of this statement being executed to the database. And if it's successful, then we should get back 1, because 1 row was added, so 1 row was affected. All right, so we're going to stop here, and I'm going to show you this in an example, because again, it's a little hard to see this just in slides. So I have a little example set up here, and this example is available on the course website. If you go to, let me actually switch to that. If you go to the course website and you go to content, let me refresh here, it seems to be running slow. There we go. And then we go to week 6, and then we go down to additional resources. This is PDO example. So this is the exact code I'm going to show you here in a moment. You're welcome to follow along. I'm not typing any code. It's just a bunch of code commented. So I'm going to uncomment it out, but you can download it so you have it for your reference. All right. So right now what I have here is I have my db.php. So here is my PDO connection. And here's my browser opened up to the index page. So right now, here is my database source name, just like we saw on our slide. So I have my MySQL, I have my host, which is localhost, and then I have my database name, which is the Movie Mayhem database. That's what I'm looking at here. Then I add my username and password, which is root and root. Then I have my try catch block, which again, we're going to make a PDO instance here where I'm passing in my database source name, the string here, and then my username and my password. That's going to get stored to this DB variable. Then I have my catch block, which is going to catch if there's any problems, right? I have this little if statement that's commented out. This is a way of testing to see if we have our database connected. So it's going to just check to see if DB was set. If this was successful, DB will have some value to it. So this will be true, and we should have a database connection. So if I save this and refresh, we can see we have database connected. Now, if I were to make a mistake, say I misnamed my database name, so I'm going to change this to drop this M here. So now we're trying to request a database that doesn't exist. If I refresh, I'm going to get an error. Now, this is the error. This is from the catch block. So the PDO instance threw an exception because it's saying, well, this is an unknown database. It's not stored in my database management system. So it's going to throw an exception, and then we output that exception, and then we're using the die command to quit. So we just get this little message here saying unknown database, and then it just nothing else, right? So that's what the try catch block is giving us. That's what's protecting us in case we make a mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back so I can have my database connected again. All right, so that is how we can connect to our database. I'm going to take this, comment this back out. Now, typically what I was saying is that we typically want to keep this in its own file, which I have right now. And then if I switch back to this index.php right here, you can see that I'm connecting, or I'm including that db.php here. Now, I've only got one index, one PHP file that's connecting to this database, but if I had multiple ones, having this as a separate file will make my project easier to maintain. All right, so now that we have our database connection and we're including it into our index.php file, we can then start writing some code. So I'm going to skip over these top ones here. I'm going to drop down to line 13 here where I'm doing a select statement. So I'm going to just uncomment these out. So I have this SQL query, and again, it's just a very simple select statement where I'm selecting all of the columns from the movies table, and because I don't have a where statement, I'm going to get all of the rows as well. Then I use that db variable, which we created in our db.php, and I'm making a call to the query method. So again, this is going to execute or send this query to the database, and it's going to send the result to this result. Now, if I hover over here, you notice that result is a PDO statement. Okay, so if this is successful, we will now have a PDO statement here. It's not the result in itself. So we're going to need to fetch those results. So I'm going to just use fetch all right here. So I have result fetch all. Okay, and I have this little flag here. So this is an important flag if you're interested. This will allow you to just limit the type of results you get back. And I'm going to show you what this does here in a moment. Okay, so just note that we're going to fetch all of the results back, and we're storing it to this movies array, and then we're going to just var dump the movies. All right, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh the page, and this is what I'm going to get. So this is the var dump happening. So it's an array. Remember that fetch all returns an array for us, and this is what we're looking at. We're looking at this array. So we have an array with each movie. So we have the movie ID, the movie title, director, year, and genre ID. Okay, and we have it for all of the movies. So right now there's 28 movies because this is the 27th ID. Remember, it starts with 0 in an array. So we have 28 movies in our database. Now, I want to show you what happens when I take this PDO fetch exoc out. So I'm just going to take this away and I'll save that and I'll refresh. So you'll notice inside of each movie array, because this is an array of arrays, so each movie array now has all of the column names. So we still have movie ID, movie title, director, year, genre ID. But we also have this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you do nothing, we just call fetch all, and this is true for fetch as well. You're going to get back both a string index as well as a number index. And they're going to have the same value. So you notice movie ID is 1 and 0 is 1. Movie title is Labyrinth, 1 is Labyrinth. So it's giving you two ways of accessing this data. I typically find it a little annoying to use these numbers. So I like to not include them, not retrieve them back. So that's why I add this little flag here. That's what that flag is allowing us to do. It's going to fetch only the associative array, not the indexed array. So then we'll just get back our column names, which is more useful. All right, so I'm going to refresh that again. All right, so that is how we can retrieve data from our database. Now, that's for just doing select queries. Now I want to show you how we can work with the non-select queries. So at the top here, I have an insert statement here. So I'm going to uncomment out this. And here we have an SQL. Notice I'm using SQL twice here. That's okay. You can reuse the variable because we're going to use this the value for this SQL right here. And so when we're overriding it down here, I'm okay. I don't want that data. I don't need that data anymore, so I'm going to override it. So it's okay to reuse the SQL here. All right, so we have an insert statement here. So we're inserting a new movie with a movie title, director, year, and genre ID. And here are the values for that movie. Then we're going to use the exec method to execute this query or to send that query to the database. Now, you can use the query statement for non-select queries, but it's better to use the exec method because we're going to get back a number when the number of rows affected when we use the exec method. So again, we do db, that special arrow, dash greater than, then exec, and we're passing our SQL query. We're storing the entire thing to result, and then we're going to echo out result. Then down here, we're going to keep this select statement. So what's going to happen is we're going to insert this movie, and then we're going to retrieve all of the movies. And if this works, the movie we just added should be in our list. So take note that we have, again, 28 movies here, with the last one being Contact. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'll refresh. And there we go. At the very top, we can see that there's this 1 here. So this 1 is coming from this echo results. That indicates that we have 1 row added or 1 row affected. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we can now see that we have 29 movies added. And we can see that our new movie, Inside Out, has been added to our database. All right, so one more. With this, I'm going to comment this out. So that's our insert statement. And now I'm going to delete that movie I just added. So I have this delete statement here. So I do, again, SQL, and I just do my delete from movies where movie title equals Inside Out. All right, so this is going to just delete the movie we just added. And again, I'm going to run that exec method with the SQL, and it's going to store it to result. And I'm going to echo out the result. So I should expect to have a 1 here. All right, so I'm going to save this again. We'll refresh the page. Okay, so I still have a 1 at the top here because that's referring to this 1 for the delete. So 1 row was affected, and we can see that the Inside Out movie is gone and no longer listed. All right, so that is a really, really quick overview of how we're using the PDO to make requests to our database. Now, there is, I do want to point out on the website here, under recordings, there is this PHP Data Objects. This is from last term. I've actually edited it down so it's a little bit shorter than watching it from the in class, but this is from in class, and I walk through much more slowly how the PDO works. So I do recommend that you watch that video as well to get some better idea of how to work with PDO. It goes through essentially the same example I just went through, but it goes through it step by step. All right, so I know I went through that a little quickly. We're going to go back and look at that some more, but are there any questions before we move on? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to error handling. So when we have an error inside of SQL, PHP won't be able to tell that. So PHP sends an SQL query to the database. The database, if it finds a problem with that SQL query, will just say, I don't know what to do, and not send PHP anything. And then PHP will be, hey, I didn't get anything, and you're trying to use it. And then the whole application kind of breaks down, right? So PHP doesn't know what's happening with SQL by default. However, there is a method called the error info method, which allows us to return what errors were actually, or what errors occurred inside the SQL or inside of the database. So it's important that we use this method to test our queries to make sure that they are valid and they actually worked. And there is, so this error info will return an array, and there is the third item in that array is a human readable explanation. So that's the one we're going to be utilizing and testing to see that there is an error or not. So let's see an example here, and then I'll show you an example in our in the code. All right, so on the slide here, again, we're retrieving our in our slide, we're retrieving our database connection, and then we make an SQL query. So we're doing select star from movies, and you notice we're missing an E here. So this is a misspelling of the table name, and we might not notice that. So we'll do our result query, and then we have this error info. So we're testing to see if our result actually, if after we executed this query, if there were any errors. So we can do a db-error info method, and we have this variable error info, and this will equal an array. And then we'll check to see if the third item, the number 2 index, has anything in it, and it would say something like no such table movies. So when we see that this error info has a value, that's an indication that we have an error. So let me show you how this works in practice. So I'm going to jump back to my code here. And you may have noticed in my select statement, kind of skipped over it, we have this error check function. So I'm going to jump down to that. I'm going to uncomment this out, but I'm going to jump down to our error check. So this is a function I created, and you're welcome to use this for your code as well. So what this error check method is doing is it's grabbing our DB variable. Now notice our DB variable is a global variable, so I need to use that global keyword in front of it so I can have access to it. Then we'll do the error info equals DB error info, right? So this is going to return an array. And then I'm going to check to see if the third item in that array is set. If it is set, it means that an error has occurred with the last query that was sent. And then I'm going to echo that out. I'm going to exit. Now this exit, even though I'm inside this function, this exit will kill the entire script, the PHP script. So it will halt anything coming after it. All right, so now if we were to do this, have this error check right as it is, and I refresh, oh, let me get rid of this delete here. Cancel this delete. And I'll save this, and I'll refresh my page. We'll notice that nothing has occurred. I'm still getting all of my movies coming back as expected. But if I were to rename this table, say I lose that E there, so we have this, so we have a misspelling. I'll save this, and I'll refresh. We can see that we have table movie mayhem.movies doesn't exist. So this is letting us know that there's a problem with our SQL query. And it halted the program and didn't continue. Because if we were to let this continue, say if I take this error check out, but I leave that mistake there, and I refresh my page, we're going to get something like this: fatal error. It's saying that fetch all is, there's no member of fetch all on Boolean, and that's because result here is coming back as false because this query failed to run. Right? So this error check is helping us out to see what our problem is, because this is not helpful. This is just telling us fetch all failed, but we don't know why, because the problem was inside of our SQL. Right? So the error info can be very useful when you're working on your projects. And again, you can use this error check function inside your projects if you wish. Okay, and you have the code. Again, you can download that code from the course website. All right, any questions about error handling with PDO and SQL queries? All right, so the last topic we're going to be discussing for PDO is the prepared statements. So prepared statements are like templates for SQL. So what we'll do is we'll write a template, an SQL statement template, and then we'll be able to insert values in those templates. And we will store these templates with the database, and then we'll tell the database when to execute those templates. Now, there's a couple different reasons why to use prepared statements. The first thing is it will optimize our database queries. So when we create a prepared statement, it gets stored with the database. And the database will know that this is a template and it's going to be used. And if we are using that same query multiple times, the database will know that, and it will keep it until we'll actually be able to run the queries faster than if we weren't using prepared statements. The other big reason to use prepared statements, and probably the bigger reason to use prepared statements, is it will help prevent SQL injection. So an SQL injection is an insertion of malicious code inside of our query. So if we don't use prepared statements, and if we're being careless with the way we write our code with SQL, it is possible for somebody who is trying to harm our website or our data to enter in some code through the browser that would actually break our database. So let me show you how this could be possible. So let's take a look at this code right here. Let's say we have a required once where we're retrieving our database connection, and then we want to say we have a search box, and we want to allow somebody to search for a movie, or we want to display a specific movie from the URL. So we say we have a query string that is getting the movie from the URL, and we're storing it to the variable movie. And then we write a query, say select star from movies, where movie title equals the movie. All right, so this is, by the way, this is all valid. This code will all run, and result will have a value that contains the movie we requested. This is all good. But it assumes that our user is passing a valid movie title. But if they were to pass something, say, like this, where they have this looks like gibberish. Why would anybody do that? But with this semicolon here, it would end our query early. So we would have, instead of having this movie passed, it would just add this semicolon. So the semicolon is how we end one query and start the next query. So it would end this semicolon, and then we would have this drop table. Now, we haven't talked about drop table because it's not something we're going to be using in this course. But drop table is a way of basically deleting a table from a database. So we're saying drop table movies. So it's basically sending the request to our SQL to drop our entire movies table, delete the movies table from our database. And if we were to let this run, it could effectively destroy our database, remove all of the movies not just remove all the movies, but remove the table completely from our database. And that would be very bad. And that's what SQL injection does. Okay. And that's what we're trying to protect from.
I have a
And
question.
yes.
Since we this job table movies is inside the select clause, why is it gonna do something else? I think it's
Well,
just
because so notice the semicolon right here.
yep.
That semicolon will end the select statement. And even though it's not complete, the database MySQL will just see that as like, oh, well, that's an incomplete SQL query, so I won't do anything. Oh, I have another SQL query. I'm going to run that one. Now, this may or may not work. Sometimes the databases have become better about trying to prevent that, but this is something we need to watch out for.
Okay.
All right. So the best way to protect ourselves from SQL injection is to use prepared statements, because what prepared statements will do is it will prevent this from executing. Anything that gets passed in here will be protected and kind of isolated from executing. All right, so that's the advantages of using prepared statements. So now let's take a look at how we actually write our prepared statements. So the one thing with prepared statements is that it has something called named parameters. And you could think of these like SQL variables. So these named parameters will serve as placeholders for future values. So they're kind of like, again, like variables with no value associated with them that will insert values at a later time. So all named parameters will start with a colon and then have the parameter name. Now, typically, we'll name them as the same name as the column we're going to store the data for. So this will typically be used for, say, for in our last example, we had movie title equals. So we'll set it the column name to colon movie underscore title. So it matches the data will match the column of the data we are looking for. Once we have our prepared statement, the string of our prepared statement set, we will use the prepared method to actually prepare the statement with the database. So let's take a look at an example here. So again, we'll retrieve our database connection, and then we're going to write our prepared statement. So we have select star from movies, where movie title equals, this is our exact from our previous example. Now we have this colon movie title. All right, so this is our placeholder. This is our named parameter. Then we're going to prepare the statement. So we'll do statement equals DB, and we'll use the prepared method, and we'll pass that SQL. Now, this does not execute. This just stores it. This is telling the database, hey, I have a template that I want you to hold on to. So once we've prepared the statement, once we have that template stored with the database, we can then execute it. But before we can execute it, we need to actually bind some data with that statement. Because we've created that named parameter, we need to store some values with that named parameter. So there's a few different ways we can do this. We can use the bind parameter method, we can use the bind value method, or we can pass in an array that will make the connection with the exec method directly. Now, the bind parameter only works with variables that can be evaluated directly, right? So what that means is it needs to be a simple like variable or the value directly, a string. It can't be something that's complicated or that uses concatenation or insertion of variables or combination of strings and numbers or addition like that. So I recommend not using bind param when you're working in this course, and instead to use the bind value. That's going to be more flexible for you, and you're going to run into fewer problems with that. I just want to bring up that you do have these two options, but bind value is generally the one you want to use. So here is an example of using that bind value method. So here again, we have we're making our database connection. We're going to create our prepared statement with our named parameter, and we prepare the statement with the database. Then we're going to bind that value. So notice we're using, we named this, or we stored this value to statement because we're going to have to use statement here moving forward. So then we have statement bind value, and the bind value takes a key and a value. So the key is our named parameter, and then the value is the value we want to pass in there. And so in this case, we want to pass $_get movie. Now, this is exactly what we did before, but because we're doing this inside of bind value, what the prepared statement is going to do is it's going to make sure this is quoted. So if there's any actual malicious code in there, it's not going to be able to get executed. So again, it's protecting us. All right. Once we bound the values, then we can execute the command with the execute method. So in this one, I'm using the execute method directly, so we don't use the bind value. So I want to show you this. So we can just create, everything else is the same, but we just call the execute method, and then we pass an array. And the array will have a key, which is the named parameter, and then its value is the value we want to pass in. So this can be a much cleaner way of doing it if you prefer to do it that way. All right, so that is.
Question.
Go ahead.
Could you talk about again the column here is what it's for?
Yeah, I'm actually going to go through an example. So that hopefully we'll see if this helps you understand this. So okay, we're going to go back to my example here. Let's correct this problem here that I have here. And we'll keep that error check in there. All right, so we'll save that. And I'm going to refresh. Okay, good. So that's back to normal. All right, so now let's say we wanted to add the ability to search to search for movies. Say if we had a search box, and we're not going to actually build a search box here, but if we wanted the ability to be able to have the user to type in a search term, and then we'll search for the movie. So that's what I have going on right here. So I'm going to just uncomment this all out. So the first thing I'm going to do is right here, we have this if statement is set get s. So what this is referring to is if there was a query statement. So if I'm going up to my URL here, and let's say I passed in a query statement. So I'm going to just do s equals, I'm going to type in time. All right, so I'm going to do a search for, I want to search for movies with the name time in their title, with the word time in their title. Now that's not going to do anything because we haven't set anything up yet. All right, so but that is what we're going to build in. And typically we would set this up with a form, but I'm keeping things simple here. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to type it in through the URL. So we have that question mark s equals time. So this is what this if statement is going to do. It's going to check for that query statement. And if there is a query statement like that, then it's going to create an SQL query. All right, and this SQL query is going to check to see it's going to be a prepared statement. So we're writing this select movie title. So we're just getting the movie titles from movies where movie title like, we're going to use the like clause. And then we have this named parameter. Now, again, this named parameter, you can kind of think of it like a variable without a value. It is a placeholder. It is a way of saying, okay, this is just a placeholder, and I'm going to actually insert the real value later. Okay, so that's what our prepared statement looks like. And then next, we want to actually prepare that statement. So we're going to do that using this db-prepare, and we're going to pass that SQL in there. We're going to store that all to the statement. Okay, and that will allow us our database to store that, or excuse me, allow PHP to store this statement so we can refer to it later. It's going to be an object. Then from there, we want to bind the values. So I'm going to bind the value of movie title my name parameter, movie title, to the value of the get s. Now, because I'm using like here, I have some wildcards associated with it, and I'm just inserting my variable directly inside using that interpolation.
Why we have a colon before the movie title here?
A colon?
Yeah.
Because this has to match exactly what our name parameter is. So our name parameter here is colon movie underscore title. So we need to have colon movie underscore title. It's kind of like having the dollar sign in PHP for variables. Same concept, only it's colon. So all name parameters must start with a colon.
So, but here it's a variable, it's kind of a placeholder.
Yeah, you can think of it as a variable. And here we're setting the value of that variable.
Okay. So for this case, is it going to be the time?
Right. So the value of movie title here will be time. All right. So it's actually going to be percent time percent because we're adding a wild cards around it. So it's going to look for time anywhere inside of the movies.
Okay.
Movie title. All right. And then we're going to execute that. And once we execute it, just like we did with our result, this will just be an object, a PDO object. So we'll need to fetch it. So we're going to fetch all, and we're going to store it in movies, and then we'll var dump the movies. All right, so I'm going to go up here. I'm going to comment out these lines here so that we don't have that appearing twice. And I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll refresh. Oh, and what do we have? An error of results. Oh, I didn't comment out enough. Need to comment out this too. There we go. That's the problem. We'll refresh. Okay, so there we go. So we can see that I'm doing a search for time and I get back Time Bandits. That's the only movie title in our database with the word time in it. Now, if I were to change time here to say something that's going to have more movies, and I hit enter, I can see back that I get the results for movies with the word the in the title. And it can be at the beginning, it can be in the middle, and so forth. Right? So that's how prepared statements work. Again, if you watch the video that's on the website that goes through this in much more detail, again, it's actually a very similar example to what I just did here, but it kind of goes through there step by step. All right? Any questions about prepared statements? You will need to be using prepared statements for your next project. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at talk about the assignments for this week. So first assignment, you have another hybrid assignment. For this one, you're going to be watching the first 4 sections of it's the PHP accessing databases with PDO and MySQLi. So the first 4 sections are talking about just PDO. If you want to learn about MySQLi, you can watch the other sections as well. Again, we're just focusing on PDO for this course. So you will write 2 to 4 sentences for each section, just explaining kind of reflecting on what you learned. And this is due July 8th. That's the week we get back after break. All right, so that is hybrid 3. The other thing we have is your midterm project. So your midterm project will be Seussology. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the Seussology database that you've been using to make your queries, and you're going to build a website around it. All right, this is a GitHub Classroom assignment, so make sure you accept that assignment. Inside of the repository, there is a new Seussology database in there. Now, I do apologize because I meant to update the other databases as well, but you do want to import this new database. Now, the only difference that occurs in this new database is the image URLs. So in the old databases, the images were pointing to a public website for the images, and those images are no longer available on that website. So instead, this repository has those images directly inside of it, and the URLs point to that. So that's the only difference. This will have no impact on the sociology DB assignments. So if you import this database and you still haven't finished those assignments yet, it will have no effect on the results. All right, so that's the import. That what you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating a sociology book site, which will allow users to search for books. It will display all of the books in the database, and you'll be allowed to search for books. You'll be able to add, edit, and delete new books. Or you'll be add new books, and you'll be able to edit and delete existing books. And this project is due July 15th. Okay, so it's due July 15th. All right, so let me show you a little bit about what this website will look like. So right here is my example of the website. The link for this is available on the assignment page, by the way. And again, you do not feel like you have to make your website look like this. This is just the way I made it look. Don't feel like you need to make it. You can create your own design as you wish. All right, so here again, we're listing out all of the books that are inside of the database. Notice some books don't have images, so you have to come up with how you want to display those, and some do. Now you can search for a image. So for example, we want to search for cat. We hit enter, and then we'll have just the books that have cat in them. Now some of these books have cat in the title, others have cat in the description. So let me, for example, the Bigelow Seed, if I click on this book right here, we can see that there is the word cat in its description. So the search is searching for inside of the title as well as the description. Now here is what a single book page will look like. This is a requirement of the assignment as well. So there should be a book page which displays the book title, the description, the published year, and the number of pages. Now, not all books will have a number of pages in them, so just be aware of that. And then you'll also display the book's quotes. So each book, or some books have quotes associated with them, so you'll need to retrieve those quotes and display them as well. Now take note of the edit button right here. If we click on this, this will allow us to edit the book. So say, for example, I want to change the year. So I can change this year to say 2012, and then I can click update. And this will update the book, and you can now see the updated year there as well. I can create a new book. So I can go to new book here, and I can create a new book. You can see I've used this several times. So I'm just going to add some content here. Say 2012, 32, and then a book. So take note, there are certain required fields and unrequired fields. This is all listed in the assignment page. So let me go to the assignment. So here's the sociology assignment. There's about the database, installing it. So right here is a list of all of the columns, and I mark which ones are required. So in the books table, only the book ID and the book title are required. All the other columns are not required, and you can leave them blank. Okay, so you won't really be adding new categories, but here are the categories as well as the quotes. I do have screenshots. I talk about creating a website. I create screenshots of what the functionality. Again, you do not need to have your site look like this. You just need to have the functionality there. All right, so here's the new book. If I add the new book to the database, we'll go to the new book page. And if I go back to home, that new book will be available. Should be listed here. It's in alphabetical order. So it's right here, A People House. Right. So that's the new book. Okay. And that's it. That's the Seussology site. Again, you can take a look at this site. I do provide the link to this site. If you scroll down here, this is a pretty long assignment page. I do provide hints, by the way. Do look at these hints. They should be fairly helpful on explaining some of the things you're going to have trouble with. So I recommend you look at it. Here's the link to that website I just looked at. Feel free to make any changes that you want. If you wanted to add books or delete books. Oh yeah, deleting books. I didn't show you that one. So you can delete books too. So for example, oh no, wait, did I take that away? Oh no, wait, go to edit, then we can go delete. All right, so delete books. So there's something I want to talk about with the delete books. In order to delete a book, you are going to need to delete the quotes first. So make sure that you delete all the quotes associated with the book first and then delete the book itself. So if we click the delete button here, that book is now been deleted. So go ahead and feel free to make any changes to this website. Its database gets refreshed about every half hour. So any changes you make will get cleared out. All right, so that is the Seussology project. Any questions?
Oh, it's intimidating.
Yes, it is a fairly large project. Yeah, but it's a midterm. It's meant to be.
It's just the midterm, okay.
It's just the midterm, yeah.
Eventually, are you gonna go into detail on how to like edit and delete, or
edit and delete
the books from the database from the site?
Yeah, so remember we went and covered edit and delete from the covering in SQL. It's the same thing. So in PDO, we just send those queries. We just send the update query or the delete query, and that will update and delete the items from the database.
Okay.
So everything you've been working with the last couple of weeks with your Seussology DB and the Movie Mayhem assignments.
Yeah, directly related to.
It's directly related to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I figured, but just want to make sure.
And why we need to delete the quote first and then
okay, so the reason why you need to delete the quotes is this has to do with database design. There's a direct connection to the quotes and the books. So quotes are directly associated with a book, and the database won't let you delete a book if there are quotes associated with it, because then we'll have orphaned quotes and you're not allowed to do that. So you will need to delete your quotes first. So you'll have to do a search to get the quotes from a book, delete those quotes, and then delete the book.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Okay. So along with Seussology, there is a midterm reflection. And the idea of this is you just write a short, say 1 paragraph reflection, talking about how you completed the project, what steps you went through, what problems you faced, what you learned, and all that. And this will be due at the same time as the midterm project. Okay, so again, this is just kind of showing, let me know what your thought processes were, what you faced, how you solved your problems. Okay, again, it does not have to be very long. This is a participation assignment. So again, it's only worth 2% by itself. And I'm not going to be grading on grammar or anything like that. It's mostly just going to see that you actually were reflecting on the project and you, yeah. It also lets me know whether or not you actually did the project. All right, any questions about the assignments?
Okay, for this term, do we have any bonus assignments as we had before?
I don't have any bonus assignments planned?
Will we?
I don't know. I guess we'll see how things go.
Okay.
And we're not expected to add our own book covers, right, for the images?
No, the images, all those book covers are provided for you inside the repository.
Okay, I mean, if we're adding a book is what I meant.
Oh, if you're at, no. So some of the books don't have covers. So you just, if you saw in my example, I just kind of have a background with the
Yeah,
title.
the placeholder backdrop, yeah.
Right. And that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about anything we've covered? How's everyone feel about this midterm?
Pretty good. I think for me, just a matter of making sure that I'm connected to the right tables and using the error handling correctly. I think you explained it pretty well, though.
Yep. And again, the code is on the website. The code we reviewed in class today is on the website, and there is that video that's available that basically goes through step by step how to use PDO.
Okay.
And I do recommend to look at, if you haven't already, look at the content for this week, the PDO content, because that also goes through, and there's some things in there that we didn't cover in class.
Sorry, maybe this is different information, but do we have a PA available for this class?
Yes. The PAs, it's all the same PAs. I think we only have 2 for this term. Both were previous students, so they've actually done this assignment, and so they will know how to help you.
Oh, perfect.
I apologize, I don't know what their schedule is, but it should be listed in the homeroom on Brightspace.
Okay.
And I know they have office hours every day. So. Any other questions? All right, so that's it for today. Next time, so next week, first off, reminder, next week, no class, right? It is midterm break, so we will not be meeting. If you do have questions, I will try and respond in reasonable time, but again, don't expect immediate because I've got a lot going on next week. So just be a heads up that if you do have questions, do feel free to email me. When we come back on July 8th, that's when we're returning back, we will be covering Laravel. So we're moving on from PHP and databases, and we're going to move on to the Laravel framework. And so we'll start learning that, and we'll start with roots and views. Now, just as a reminder, there's several assignments due today. So we have Movie Mayhem 2 is due tonight. The Sociology DB1 is due tonight, and your hybrid number 2 is due tonight. So don't forget about getting those submitted. You also have the Sociology DB2, which is due July 8th. So a lot of assignments due before we meet again. All right, so don't forget to do those. Any final questions before I let you go?
When everyone's left, can I just talk to you quickly?
Absolutely. Okay. If there are no questions, that is all I have. Do have a wonderful break, and we'll see you all on July 8th. Thank you.